Like, I was just thinking about this. The first time I ever went to Colorado, I got to play Red Rocks, and I was 12. Like, that's nuts. That's so nuts.
At 10 years old, Sierra Hull stepped onto the Grand Ole Opry stage.
The mandolin. I just love the mandolin. I'm in love with the mandolin. Yeah.
By 13, she had a record deal. By 20, she played the White House. But that was just the beginning, because the real story is what came after the prodigy phase. In this episode, we sit down with Sierra to unpack the real journey of becoming an artist.
Like, this was never just something I dreamed of doing temporarily.
What she learned from mentors like Alison Krauss and Béla Fleck, and how she's carving a new path as an independent artist, redefining her relationship to craft, creativity, and ambition. This is a really special episode. Let's dive in.
Sierra, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey,
welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I have so many questions. I want to dig into a bunch of things, but I think it would make the most sense to start from the beginning. Do you remember your entryway into music? Because I know you started when you were very young.
Yeah, I do actually. Well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by music, because music always has felt like it's been a part of my world, like long before I remember. One of my earliest memories is like sitting in my mom's lap and her teaching me how to sing this song called He's Still Working on Me. You know, I was like growing up hearing music in church. Music was just kind of around. My mom always had a beautiful singing voice, like her mom and her uncle and her aunt, so my great aunt and uncle, they kind of just, music is a way of life, you know. They didn't have a lot going on in their little small Tennessee towns, you know, and it was the way people kind of passed the time.
Yeah.
And the way a lot of poor families, it was music is free. You know, there's something it doesn't cost you anything to lift your voice and sing. And so I think, you know, it definitely kind of goes back generationally in that way with my family and the part of the world they're from. But I remember hearing those songs, so like my mom teaching me to sing, just always, that felt very natural as a kid. So I remember my granny asking me at the time, how would you like to play the fiddle? Because listen, people in that part of the world where I'm from in Tennessee, they like the fiddle is the bomb. They love the fiddle for well, I won't say for some reason, because I do too, but the fiddle's where it's at. And so I remember, like, they got me a fiddle for Christmas. My great aunt and uncle and my granny all went in together to get me one, but it was a full size, and you know, I was 8, so I just turned 8. I was tiny anyway for my age, and
you got a cello basically.
By the time I stretched my arm all the way out, it's like I couldn't even reach the end of the fretboard. And so my dad had just started learning mandolin a little bit, and so he said, well, hey, like, the mandolin's tuned like the fiddle, and I could go ahead and show you a tune. So he taught me, like, Boil Them Cabbage Down, you know that tune?
Yeah.
Just a really basic, you know, basically an A scale, but in music form, right? So like learning that tune. And I actually learned that on an old bowl-back mandolin. We call them a tater bug, you know, where I'm from. But my Uncle Junior had one of those, so it was just kind of like an old mandolin that really didn't seem like it was worth much. But yeah, I learned my first tune on one of those, like, kind of more Italian classical bowl-back mandolins, and then it was kind of like from there, if I was interested in it, well, the goal was to eventually get me a smaller fiddle, actually. But my dad taught me that tune, and then it was like in a couple weeks we hadn't got a fiddle yet, and my dad said to me, well, if you'll stick with it, like, we'll get you a mandolin of your own. So maybe a month or two in, I was like trying to learn tunes on the bowl-back mandolin, and just that he was showing me, and they eventually got me my own little kind of A-style Kentucky that I think we bought from somebody at church that had one, you know, just a little starter mandolin.
Yeah. It was the Nashville alarm clock right there.
That's right.
Yeah. At what point in your life did you hear Alison Krauss for the first time? Because I know she had a big influence on your upbringing. When did that come?
I was 9. I was 9 years old, got my first Alison album, and at that point, like, you know, I was 8 when I learned my first tune, got really excited about playing. I started tagging along with my dad to these Bluegrass jams on the weekend. So we would go in and we would get a new CD every week. It was kind of like that was our thing. I'd get out of school, we'd go to Jamestown, we'd go find our new CD of the week that we were going to obsess over that whole week until the next week, you know, and then go to the jam. And I remember him pointing to an Alison Krauss album in the store, and at the time it looked so fancy because it had one of the sleeve covers. Remember when that was like the hip thing where you could get the little like fancy extra sleeve that then you pulled off the jewel case?
Yeah.
And I remember even then thinking like, ooh, this looks fancy.
Yeah,
and I said, this doesn't look like it'd be a bluegrass album. And it actually was her album Forget About It, which is not a bluegrass album at all. But we put it in as soon as we got in the parking lot there, opened it up, put it in the player, and I don't know, I just was like, wow, I love this. But Forget About It really just, opened my world up to hearing a female voice, which, a lot of the bluegrass stuff I was listening to at the time was a lot of male artists, a lot of male bands, which I love and are some of my biggest heroes. But who knows? Maybe it was partly because here's this woman's voice coming out of the car speaker, and I'm like, wow, listen to that. And just the polishedness of the album, just it sort of made me realize there's like this other part of musical sounds that I could be excited about too, that wasn't just the traditional bluegrass that I was kind of growing up with.
Mm-hmm. What was that learning process like for you? How did you learn all these fiddle tunes and then also sort of like progress on the instrument as a young person?
A lot of it was through fiddle tunes, truly. I mean, like from the first thing I learned being Bowl Them Cabbage Down, and like I said, it's basically like you're learning an A major scale without knowing you are, right? Because it's built in, it's such a melodic style of music.
Yeah.
A lot of the fiddle tunes are based around those major scale kind of sounds, with the occasional flat third or flat seven to have that kind of like bluesy element. But yeah, like from my dad teaching me my first tune to suddenly like going to these jams and hearing not only just the instrumental tunes, but also the vocal tunes. People were, the music they were jamming on every weekend was like the music of Flatt and Scruggs and Bill Monroe and the Stanley Brothers. And without even knowing that that's where that stuff came from, of course I know who Bill Monroe was, but I might hear like a local jammer like call a tune Little Cabin Home on the Hill and wouldn't have known the source necessarily. But you go to those jams week after week after week, it's like the perfect environment for a young person to not only like learn stuff but just absorb the catalog. I can't tell you, I know hundreds and hundreds of bluegrass choruses from just growing up around it like that, where that stuff gets ingrained in you, where it becomes kind of part of your musical identity. So part of it was my dad. I mean, he taught me Old Joe Clark, Red Haired Boy, some of those early tunes, because he himself was trying to learn it. And then I think he kind of realized, okay, well, she's really into this. My brother was into it a little bit as well, but I think I really kind of got into it. And so he was, focusing his energy on trying to help me learn. So then I got some tablature books, and we, had some of the homespun videotapes and kind of just anything we could get our hands on. It's like he was doing his best to kind of, show me all he could that he was learning, but then also introduce me to all these other avenues that I could learn.
Yeah.
By the way, my name is Spencer. I'm the founder here at Sonora Guitar Intensive. We've been making these interviews in partnership with our friends at Carter Vintage Guitars here in Nashville, Tennessee. If you're the type of person who enjoys in-depth interviews with some of the world's best musicians, please consider hitting that subscribe button and leaving us a comment below. It really helps us grow the channel, and it gets these interviews in front of more people. With that, let's jump into it.
When you were a kid, did you have aspirations of being a professional? Were you like clear on that being your track, or was it just like having fun playing music?
It pretty much, I don't remember exactly when it hit me, but I feel like I've pretty much always known. Yeah. Like as I don't remember a time now where I didn't know this is what I wanted to do, which is crazy, thinking back, because I still have friends my age now who are still trying to figure out like what their true passion is, what they want to do with their life, to, of all the things that are, gray areas in life, like that has never been one for me. I've always known and felt called that this is what I really wanted to do.
Who were some of your early mentors in this process outside of your dad, obviously?
Yeah, my dad, there was a guy named Carl Berggren who was a mandolin player that lived in Jamestown. And at the time, like, as I was saying, there wasn't really like places to go get lessons and that kind of a thing. And just that rural part of the world is just more like, okay, here's these players, but it's not like hardly anybody's teaching lessons. And this was, makes me start to feel old now, but kind of pre-YouTube. It wasn't like you could just go on and find all the, you know, access all the things that we kind of now can. So it was a little bit like, you know, how do you get going with all this? So I remember my dad, when he found that I was being really serious about it and he had kind of taught me everything he knew, it was sort of like, well, we need to find somebody to give you some lessons, but who? You know? And so we started asking around at the jam, and people kind of kept bringing up this guy Carl's name. And they said, well, he's the best local mandolin player around, you know, like, I don't think he gives lessons, but I think like one of his wife's relatives or something would be at the jam, and they're like, ask him, maybe he'll introduce you guys. So he gave us his phone number, and I think we just kind of cold called him or whatever. And my dad's like, my daughter's learning to play mandolin, she's really serious about it, and everybody says like, you know, you're a great player, and we're just wondering like, do you ever give lessons? Would you be willing to like maybe show her some stuff? And at the time, he had played with one of my bluegrass heroes, a guy named Larry Sparks, for several years on tour at one point in his kind of musical world, but he had kind of pretty much laid it down and was working as a logger.
Wow.
So he was, you know, like hauling logs
so
for a living,
yeah.
and like working this hard labor job. And so he just hadn't had time for music very much, but he basically said, well, hey, why don't you guys just come over like next Friday before the jam, just come over and, you know, we'll see if, you know, I can help her with some stuff. He never charged me a dime, never charged our family a dime. He just, and I think for him, I remember him saying he had pretty much quit playing, and having a young kid like me come around and be excited about it again kind of got him back into playing. So, you know, I think there was some joy in it for him, but also like what a generous thing to gift a young kid. So I learned so much from Carl about playing with feeling and expression, and like, having a rhythmic sense, playing chords, you know, and chopping with groove and like all those things, and also getting to like, you know, sit right there in front of someone that was a really talented player. Early on, I think I just absorbed a lot. He would write out tablature for me as well.
You still stay in touch with him?
I've not seen him in years. I don't. Carl,
hopefully he catches this video.
Yeah, if you see
this, so proud.
Hit me up.
That's awesome. Do you remember your first time kind of playing on a more serious stage or a performance kind of level?
Well, so much happened for me so young that it's like, you know, I both remember it, but it's like some of it feels a little blurry. I mean, I remember clearly the first time I really got on stage and played. I think maybe I had played a song in church, like I'd played for people playing mandolin, but I had learned Lonesome Moonlight Waltz. Do you know that tune?
Yeah.
And well, I was learning a ton of tunes at that time, but I remember playing that backstage at the jam for somebody, and they said, why don't you get on stage and play that? And I was like, I don't know, you know, like kind of a little bit shy about it and getting up there. So I got up there and played my first tune at the Pine Haven Community Center.
You're officially professional.
And that sort of like felt like, okay, well, it's okay for me to be able to get up on this stage and play, and the local musicians would let me get up. Even when I didn't know a lot of the songs and stuff, they'd let me like stand in the background and kind of chop along and play with them, and they would encourage me to get up with them, you know. So when I was about 10 years old, we opened a little show I think it was in Crossville, Tennessee, at the fairgrounds for Grand Ole Opry member Mike Snyder and his band, and he said, oh, next time you see these kids, they'll be with me at the Grand Ole Opry, you know. So like even from the age of 10, getting to go make my Opry debut with Mike Snyder, my brother and I got to do that together. Wow. Even before that, I mean, when I was 9, I got invited to IBMA, to do the Kids on Bluegrass, which again, being from such a small community, I mean, there wasn't like heroes that were coming to my town, you know. So I hadn't really met a lot of these people that I was listening to and loving yet. And I went to IBMA, and it's like, oh my God, like I just met Earl Scruggs, and Ricky Skaggs just walked off the elevator, and Sam Bush jammed with me. It was just like this insane experience for a young kid. And I'd only been playing about a year at that point.
Wow.
You know, so I had gotten to play a little bit with like Sam and Ricky Skaggs had got me up on stage the next year when I was at IBMA. So I had like done a few things, but yeah, I was, I guess, 11 when I officially met Alison. And probably the first big tour I did was a thing called the Great High Mountain Tour with her. That was my brother and I got to play as a duo, and I got to play some with her on that. And it was kind of a tour that T-Bone Burnett had produced that included the music from the Cold Mountain movie and the Oh Brother Wert Thou soundtracks. And I wasn't on either one of them, but Alison was, you know, just basically like, hey, T-Bone, these kids are great. You should check them out. And so we, like, I was just thinking about this. The first time I ever went to Colorado, I got to play Red Rocks, and I was 12. Like, that's nuts. That's so nuts.
I mean, it's a pretty common 12-year-old experience.
So it's like there were some things that happened early on that now as an adult, I'm just like, that's just wild.
Totally wild.
That was sort of some of my first introduction into like touring and getting to go out and do stuff thanks to someone like Alison. You know?
I want to back up to that moment. I've heard you talk about this story, and I just think it's so great. Can you talk about the day that you met Alison and kind of what led up to that?
Yeah, well, so my dad there was a guy that used to always bring Bluegrass Unlimited, the magazine, over to our house, a local fiddler named Lowell Logan. And he would always get his copy, check it out, and he'd drive it over to our house and give me his copy, which is such a sweet thing. And I used to skim the pages. I mean, when I say I was an Alison fan, you know, that's saying it lightly. I was just obsessed. I was such a nerd. I would, like, you know, go to the Bluegrass section at Walmart that I was talking about, and I would literally take the Alison and Union Station albums and just put them on the front of every music genre. I would just spread them out so that it was like 10 Krauss records, because I was like, people need this. It's so good, people need this. You know, just insane. So even though it really wasn't that long from the time that I first heard her music to the time I was playing with her, like a year or two feels like an eternity in a young person's life. Child, yeah. So I had like all this time to just obsess over my hero and what it would be like to get to meet them. Yeah. So my dad pointed to an advertisement for the Merle Fest in Bluegrass Unlimited one day, and I had seen it, but the idea, like, we didn't take vacations. My parents didn't have a lot of money. They worked, they worked long hours, you know, through the week and stuff like that. So the idea of like going to North Carolina to a festival, I couldn't hardly comprehend that really. But my dad said, do you want to go? And I was like, wait, what? Like, we can do this? So I was determined I was going to get to meet Alison. She was going to sign my fiddle. It was going to happen.
You had a game plan.
Simply because we were going. We were setting foot in the festival grounds. And my mom was like, hey, so, you know, actually, this is a pretty big festival, honey, so you might not get to meet her. I don't want you to get your hopes up too much. And I said, oh, Mom, just please pray I get to meet her. I just wanted to meet her so bad. And so the next day, we're walking around, Chris Thiele's standing there, and he's signing some autographs. He had just finished on one of the little side stages doing a workshop or something. And of course, I'd become a big Nickel Creek fan because Alison produced that first record, and he had become like my mandolin hero. So I took my strap off, my girl power strap off the mandolin to have him sign, and got a photo with him. And I was on cloud nine, like, that I got to meet him, you know. And so then we walked, you know, a pretty good ways away from the crowd of people that was talking to him, and somebody stopped me and they said, hey, are you that little girl that I saw jamming last night? And I was like, oh yeah, that was me. And so he said, well, I was telling my daughter about you. Will you play a tune for her? Like, I hate to ask, but would you play a tune for her? I'd love for her to get to hear you play. So I was like, well, okay. Well, I didn't have the strap on because he had just signed it. So I knelt down in the grass, and, you know, as would often happen back then, somebody'd say, play something. And I'm like, I don't know, what should I play? And so my dad said, well, hey, she just got to meet Chris Thiele. You've been learning that tune of his Ode to a Butterfly. Why don't you try to play that? So I was like, okay. So I gave it my, you know, started trying to play the tune. And then somebody ran and got Chris, which had to be an effort, because in my mind, we weren't that close to where he was. We weren't within earshot, but somebody like ran and got him. And by the time I was done, he had heard me play a little bit of the tune, and I look up and there he is. Yeah. And he says, holy cow, do you want to play it together? And so we found a little quiet spot and jammed for a couple hours, and he took me backstage to meet Alison, which was just like an unbelievable thing to get to meet two of my biggest influences in one pop like that.
Yeah. Wild. Wild. That's so cool. How did things transition into like being a fan to you really being a mentee of hers?
Well, then a few months later, so this was maybe in April when World Fest usually is, and then I guess I would have still been 10 around that time, and then fast forward to IBMA being in the fall, usually around the end of September or early October. I got invited back to do the Kids on Bluegrass thing, and I think this was maybe my third year getting to be there, so I was starting to like have some friends in that community and had met some of my heroes through that. But I remember being in a little green room area practicing with some of the kids for the thing, and in my mind I was also thinking, I wonder if she's going to be here, or I wonder if anybody in her band's going to be here, because I get just such a big fan. And in walks Ron Block, who's been in Alison's band for many, many years now. And I was equally excited to meet him. I just loved the music so much that they made. And so I remember whenever, the jam kind of wrapped up with the kids and he was still there, my dad would always just be like, well, you better go over there and say hello. Like, he wasn't going to hold my hand doing it. He'd be like, if you want to meet him, right there he is. You better walk up to him and say hello. So I kind of walked up and my dad oftentimes, I remember being shy about it too, but he would be like, well, ask him if he'll play a tune with you. And I hated to do that. Even then I was kind of like, oh no, I know that he's Ron Block and I'm just this kid. And I would always be a little bit shy, but my dad would kind of, in that way, because he knew that I wanted that so bad. He'd be like, thinking like, what's the worst thing he could say is, no, I'm busy or whatever. But Ron was so sweet. He jammed with me. He ended up like hanging out with me and my brother and playing tunes with us for a long time. And that was really the beginning of a really special relationship with him as well. And later his family. He produced my first record. But I don't really know what happened in the space of that meeting and Alison calling, but he must have just gone back and been like, yo, Alison, this girl is like learning all of our tunes. Like, I was learning everything I could off those records. Like, he must have just said she's thoroughly obsessed and I want you to know or something. But next thing I know, she calls, like cold calls my house to come play the Grand Ole Opry with her.
Wow.
Which was unbelievable. And that was kind of the beginning of a special
Cold
relationship.
Call,
yes. Yeah, it's crazy.
Lucky you picked up.
Yeah, well, I wasn't there. My dad was there when Mom and I come back from the grocery store or something, and I knew like he was kind of like stalling or something. He'd go, oh, by the way, didn't say anything right away. Oh, by the way, someone called while y'all were gone. And I was like, oh, who? And he goes, yeah, they called. They want you to come play the Grand Ole Opry again. And I was like, really? Like, wow, I can't believe that. And he goes, yeah, guess who it is? And I was like, I don't know who. And he goes, no, guess. And I said, well, I had met Sam Bush. I'd met Ricky Skaggs. Like, there was a few, people I had met. So I started naming off. I was like, Mike Snyder again? He goes, no. And he goes, Alison Krauss. And I just melted. I could not believe. Because I drew pictures of myself on stage with her at the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah.
Long before it happened. Because that was just my dream,
Yeah. That is wild. That is a wild story.
I guess I need to draw more pictures. Yeah, see what happens.
You figured out manifestation long before the New Age folks. That's awesome. One of the things that really struck me when I was researching you is the transition that you made because you had such an early rise. And I think Alison maybe even made mention of this, like the transition from child prodigy, if we can use those words, into a fully developed musician as an adult. Not a lot of people are able to bridge that gap and really like come into their full expression and sort of leave the child identity behind. I wonder if you'd be open to talking about that process for you.
Yeah, I think for me, I always, this was never just something I dreamed of doing temporarily. I think because I knew it was what I wanted so early on, there was always this sense of like, what's next, and trying to keep my feet on the ground in a way that I knew I could never stop growing. Yeah. That it wasn't like, oh, Alison called, so that's it. Now I'm done.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, it never has.
Peaked at 12.
It never, even though that was kind of like all I dreamed of at the time. You
Yeah.
know, but I always knew that I wanted to basically travel, and I wanted to eventually make records and tour and play with a band and all that stuff. That was like really obvious to me early on. Getting to be around Alison, my hero, and see it up close and watch the way, you know, she does things, watch the way, you know, getting to know Sam Bush at such a young age, like all these heroes of mine, you know, having that kind of access early on, both, I think in a weird way kept me grounded too, because, and of course I always, like, you know, my folks were really good about that with both me and my brother, making sure that, you know, we didn't get too big for our britches, as they say. But like, you know, I remember my dad telling me early on, you know, like, if you really want this, you're going to have to continue to work hard at it. And you may be great right now for your age, but like, if you wake up and you're 16 and you sound like a 10-year-old does, then nobody's going to really care, you know, and not that it's like a battle to like get people's attention, but you know, part of having a career is not being that kid that's like a prodigy at 10 and then never grows from there. And so I think that understanding came to me at an early age, just because I was surrounded by a lot of people that kind of imparted that wisdom on me, that like, hey, if you want to do this, you got to love it, and if you do love it though, you've got to continue to work at it, because nothing's going to just be handed to you.
What prompted you to study at Berklee?
It came to me, honestly. I was not planning on going to music school. Again, one of those things that, you know, sometimes life just hands you an opportunity and you have to decide like what to do with it, you know, and sort of embrace it. It sounds funny to say this, because I think that the perception of Berklee now is so different all these years later, but I had not even heard of Berklee as a music school. I mean, I grew up in this kind of little bluegrass bubble. The school I went to the only high school in the county, to give you context, you know.
Right.
But while I was maybe in my sophomore year, someone from Berklee reached out and basically said they saw a video or something of me online and just said, you know, we'd love you to consider coming to school here if you're thinking about music school, and we can offer you full tuition. And again, at the time I was like, I didn't even know what Berklee was. So it was like, oh gosh. And they're like, oh, by the way, you'll be the first bluegrass musician to receive this. So then there was this like pressure to be like, wait, what? Like, I didn't think there was any way I would get that. You know, they kind of floated that maybe that was a possibility, but I thought there's no way I'm going to get that. Like, I'm not your ideal music student because I've not been prepping for this. I don't even know what I would be. You know, so much of how I grew up playing, I didn't grow up studying theory or learning to read music. I didn't read music like at all at that point. I hadn't been studying harmony. I just was like learning to play through doing it. And I remember specifically Alison saying to me, because I remember they gave me that, it sounds so silly, but they told me about the scholarship, and I cried because I was like, I don't know what to do, because this is not what I was planning on. You know, it's like I just wanted to be able to tour, but at the same time I went, well, if they're giving me this, I almost have no excuse not to do it. And I remember Alison saying, your career is still going to be here. It's not going anywhere. Like, she said, go for a year. If it sucks, you can always come home.
Yeah.
So I just decided to do it. And I went into it with this sort of like, you know, whirlwind experience of having not prepped for it, not really knowing what I was doing there, you know, and also simultaneously feeling like, oh my gosh, an imposter, like they're going to figure out like you know, they should have given this to someone that really knows what's up, because I'm just like, I can kind of play my instrument and sing and stuff, but it's not like I really, you know what I mean? I didn't feel like a music student in that way, and I thought there's people who are prepping for this and would be like so much more deserving.
I'm so glad that you experience imposter syndrome, because
gosh, still to this day.
Yeah, it's very very relatable. Yeah. I'm curious, what did you learn there? Like, what were the biggest takeaways from your experience studying at Berklee?
It sounds so silly and bizarre now, but I don't even think I would have used like the term something as simple as a triad. That wouldn't have been built into my language growing up. Not only just learning music, but also kind of learning music from a bunch of country people who just, they're not talking about music that way. It's kind of like, hey, here's how you make a G chord. Here's how you make a G chord. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, this is a first inversion of a G chord. I just wouldn't have even known what that meant, but I knew how to make the shape.
Yeah.
but to me, it's all G. And
Yeah.
it is really as simple as that, but understanding that, oh, well, that just means that the third's in the bass, you know? So things like that, a lot went over my head, but a lot just started to give me some vocabulary, even in the most, you know, basic kindergarten of ways of how to sort of talk about music with, you know, other people who maybe didn't grow up playing bluegrass or, you know.
Well, I'm curious, I want to learn more about your learning path, because it seems like what's very central to you is just that you're always learning, it seems like. And one of the areas that I noticed while I was doing my research is the first few albums that you made were incredible and very inside the tradition. And then there was a record that you made with Béla Fleck that seemed to be this like, it was a left turn in this beautiful direction. Can you talk about what you learned in that record process, and maybe some of the things that you learned working with Béla?
Totally. Well, so that album you're talking about is called Weighted Mind.
Yeah.
At that time, I was just starting to come out of my Berklee time.
Yeah.
So I made my first album in high school, made my second album while I was in Boston.
Yeah.
And then I was, you know, writing more songs than ever before. I think at some point I kind of just realized, I specifically have a memory of looking at a set list of like the things that I was performing, and even some of the songs off the first couple records, and thinking, you know, I really like this music, but you know, I hadn't written very much of it, like some of it, like maybe half the music from my Daybreak album, the second one, you know, I'd started to write more, and I started to just feel this need to like I had things I wanted to say or sing about, you know. And I think I had often experienced as a woman playing bluegrass, which I love so much, but even to this day, you know, if I'm like starting to jam something, it's like, well, you know, this song you might want to do Your Love Is Like a Flower, but it sounds so good in B. Like that's the key the banjo rocks in. It's like to bump it to C sharp is just, that just doesn't do the thing, you know. So let me be the harmony singer. I'm happy all day long being the harmony singer at a bluegrass jam because I love that part of it. But oftentimes, you know, the keys that the songs are in traditionally don't always lend themselves to the female voice because they're a lot of traditionally male vocals, you know, which is awesome. You know, it's no slam to the thing. It's just the truth.
Yeah.
So I found myself kind of wanting to write things that felt like I could sing them and feel like they were my voice, you know, in a way, and searching for that. And whether it was bluegrass or whatever. So I started writing. I was actually using guitar and writing a lot too. I started playing guitar when I was 9. So I've, you know, done my fair share of trying to learn my Tony Rice licks over the years and all that. But like, especially like, you know, the really kind of beautiful guitar stuff, always loved writing with that instrument. And so I decided it was time for me to think about making another record, and I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted it to be yet. But if anything, I was like, this isn't going to be my Hot Licks on the Mandolin record. Not that I'd ever made a record really thinking about that, but I guess there was this part of me that really wanted it to be about the songs and the songwriting more than anything, because I just felt like it had to. So I went in the studio with a great engineer here in Nashville named Vance Powell, recorded in the big room over at RCA, and kind of did this live thing first time, like having drums on something and a little bit of electric. I was playing tons of acoustic, kind of did this very like Americana kind of thing, and recorded like 6 tracks. And then I got some pushback from the label because I think they started like getting nervous, like, we like this, but it's like quite a departure from what you're doing. And so there was like that. Then I started feeling all my self-doubt creep in, and I just got in a really like dark place about it. They kind of like halted my session. And, you know, it put me in this place where I was like, well, this sucks. Now what do I do? Because I felt like this was me really trying to be vulnerable and do what I felt like was truest to me in that moment. But yet, you know, I understand from the label side why, you know, you've got this, you know, young woman trying to do her thing, and you're just like, I don't know, is this really, you know, is this the thing? And before, like, they hadn't heard a note of the other albums that I had done before. There was just complete trust, and I turned them in and they were done. And
wow.
So this was like also new for me to be questioned all the way around a little bit. But before I'd had producers I was working with, I was producing myself. So I think all that stuff made them nervous, rightfully so. So then I remember, again, going back to my good old buddy Alison, I was like, I remember like going very frustratedly to her and being like, I just don't even know what to do now. Like, I feel stuck. I don't know whether or not I need to just start over, just go, if they're doubting this stuff, like maybe I just need to kind of start over and get a producer that I can kind of have somebody in my corner that they feel good about and that I feel good about. But I just was having a hard time knowing who that would be, because I knew this wasn't going to be like a bluegrass album per se. Yeah. And she's the one who actually said to me, hey, you know who I think would be good for you? And keep in mind, thinking about the songwriter portion, I was definitely thinking far less about the instrumental side. I was thinking vocal forward, songwriter forward kind of project. She said, I think Béla Fleck would be a good producer for you, which was so interesting to me, because he was the furthest person from my mind, because I think of him as being the epitome of the instrumentalist, yeah. Right? And I'm going, that's interesting. And she goes, no, here's why. He had produced some albums for the Nashville Bluegrass Band back in the day, another artist named Mara O'Connell. Mm-hmm. And she remembered really liking the albums he had produced for these artists. And she goes, there's nothing musically he doesn't understand. Mm-hmm. And like, you're in a place where you're exploring all this stuff and you're like, doing all these things. She goes, there's nothing musically he doesn't understand. And she goes, I think he'd be a great vocal producer for you. Mm. So I was like, interesting. If like one of my favorite vocalists of all time is saying she thinks Béla would be a great vocal producer, I was just like, interesting. So then I ran into him at the IBMA Awards, like literally a few weeks later. Again, one of those things that just the moment that I hadn't seen him in a long time. Like, we knew each other a little bit, but not that well. And I'm sitting there in my seat and somebody taps me on the shoulder and I turn around and it's Béla and Abby and he goes, hey, Sierra, good to see you. And I was like, just the guy I've been looking for. And so I remember her saying to me, even if he's not interested in producing or doesn't have time, I bet you he would still be a good person to just go pick his brain, mm-hmm. to play some of your music for, see what just maybe he has some good ideas for you. So I kind of just presented it that way, like, hey, I'm in the midst of trying to make this record and I'm at a standstill and I'm like, trying to figure out if I start over, like what I'm doing, but I have these songs that I feel like really connected to. Like, mm-hmm. would you be willing to just get together with me, And I told him that Alison had mentioned him, as maybe being a good source for that. And so he basically was like, well, come over. Yeah. So I remember going over, and keep in mind, I'd been playing guitar on most of the songs that I had written. And I took my mandolin over there to his house. And I remember him saying, well, can you play me a little bit of what you have been working on? Actually, I had already sent him a couple of my tracks that I recorded with Vance Powell. And I remember him being like, look, these sound great. They're recorded great. Everybody's playing great. He was like, you sound great. He goes, but the thing that I will say that I'm kind of missing is like, if anything, you're being too generous with letting everybody else do the thing. He goes, I know how capable you are of like really letting your voice shine through. And I feel like, you're sort of like taking a back seat even instrumentally, which I think, I was, because I was trying to be like, I'll prove that I'm not just a mandolin player. So I'm going to just be over here and make it so about the song that you have to listen to my song. But I remember him being like, well, can you play me a little bit? There's a track called Compass that I had sent him. And I remember him saying, can you play this for me? And I didn't really ever play solo at that point. So I remember very nervously being like, oh my God, I wasn't expecting to sit here and play and sing my songs for Béla Fleck, who I barely know. Solo. It's all like, it's like the song that has this riff built into it. Yeah. And so I nervously did it. And he goes, that. He goes, look, he said, if there's anything that I can tell you, he goes, this stuff is all really great. He goes, but when you do that, nobody sounds like that. He goes, that's you. That's so uniquely you. He goes, I almost think you should do the opposite of this. Like, I'm adding more stuff over here to do something different. He goes, what if you take all of that away and it's just you and you just make a solo album? And I was thinking, does anybody want to hear that? Like, in my mind, it was just wild to even hear that. Like, I wouldn't have even thought that would be interesting. But I think having somebody that I admire like him have that kind of like reaction to me playing solo kind of gave me that little boost of confidence at a time where I was feeling a little bit dark and beat down about what to do. If anything, he was going, no, you are enough. Just even by yourself hear enough. And it made me go, well, what happens if I kind of lean into that? So we started kind of getting together and having these sessions where it was almost like I didn't even know if he was going to produce my record or if we were just kind of hanging out. He's just being a pal, like offering me insight.
Yeah.
But I would, I started taking songs that I had already recorded and then reworking them, in some cases like trying to find fresh ways to make them mandolin centric. And then he would just kind of hear something and he'd go, well, what about that part right there if you added just a little instrumental section here? And then I go, okay, cool. So yeah, it was really special getting to work with him in that way. And then obviously he eventually produced the record, and I made a very different kind of record than what I had originally started. But it was still with like a lot of those same songs and sort of just, you know, stripping everything away.
Yeah. And what was the reception of the label for that record after you?
They loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How could they not?
They loved it. I also think, you know, it's a lot less scary to think about the transition of that than what I, you know, than introducing like, you know, drums into the fold, and electric guitar. And of course, it's funny though, when you think about labels, it's like, you know, by the time I actually made that label, the folks that had sort of been pushing back on my original ideas, like, it had already turned over. And I think at the end of the day, they were absolutely right. And had they not pushed me to, you know, rethink what I was doing a little bit and put the brakes on and really search myself, I mean, that was what led me to the relationship with Béla, which has been a life-changing relationship now, having also got to play a lot of his music over the last few years, touring with him a lot and things like that. So I'm grateful. I think all that, I grew a lot during the process of that. And sometimes you need that. You need, you know, that pushback.
What would you say are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from Béla?
He's just one of the most creative people that I've been around. It's like there's never been a time where I'm around him where he doesn't have something he's working on. You know, whether it's, you know, like when we were touring, you mentioned the Rhapsody in Blue project earlier before we started recording, and how, you know, he was just starting to like hit the shed on that. So it's like, you know, we'd finish a 3-hour show and then he's back there practicing his Rhapsody in Blue because he knew that was something coming up that he wanted to do, you know. So his work ethic and his drive, you know, even now in his 60s, which is really inspiring, you know, to go someone like basically twice my age that still has that kind of fire for playing. It's like that's the dream. That's what you hope of, to still like be fueled and be excited about all of this. You know, a lot of people don't have that. They have that early in their musical world, and then that burns out. And I do kind of understand, like life happens, life gets in the way, that you might have kids at some point, things slow you down a little bit. Like there's a lot of things that can kind of cause that, or burn out from years of doing it, you know, but somehow he has managed to, you know, stay fueled with creative projects that, like, you know, continue to challenge him. I don't know that I've ever stood on stage night after night with a musician that could improvise like he can. And it was like, you know, if you're going to be up there with that, there's a certain amount, like, you know, I'm nowhere near on his level of playing, but like you're grabbing for it. You know what I mean? You can't just kind of play it safe when that's what's coming in your, you know, your ear every night.
I'm curious, how do you relate to working on your craft? What does practice look like for you? How do you think about progress on your instrument now?
I've always had an interesting relationship with practice because I'm somebody that spends tons of time with the instrument or making music, but it's not always in a really rigid way. Like I said, the first thing I learned a chord or a scale or anything was a tune. So a lot of times the way I approach growth is through the process of making music on the instrument in some way, you know, and it's only been in sort of recent years that I've kind of went, maybe I should start practicing something like arpeggios. Like, you know, I just didn't do a lot of that kind of stuff as a kid, you know? So those kind of like warm-up things, like for really the first time in my career over the last year or so, I'm like dedicated to doing vocal warm-ups before shows and things like that, because I wasn't taught that as a young musician. It was more like, you know, being taught music through making music, or being taught to sing, or singing harmony through like just learning to sing, you know, listening to albums. sort of doing all this stuff by ear. So I think when I start thinking about how busy I am and the desire to want to preserve my skills for years to come, I think the adult in me now goes, okay, it's probably not the wisest thing to do what I did when I was 12. Just get the instrument and out and, just go crazy playing something. It's like, that can't be good.
Mm-hmm.
That can't be good for the long-term endurance of doing all this, So I think I have gotten a little bit more where I think about doing warm-ups, whether it's things like arpeggios or even just like, it's kind of fun one I like to do.
Yeah, it's nice.
Just going up this chord scale, I know. And finding different variations of ways you can make that musical somehow. Little things like that I'll try to warm up in ways that are a little bit more standard, I guess, than what I used to.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of my time spent with the instrument truly is trying to discover things on the instrument, try to train my hands to do things they've not done before. I think for me, that's what I'm always trying to chase, is what feels musically satisfying in a moment.
And I wonder if you would be open to maybe demonstrating kind of what your writing process looks like. You spoke about earlier, finding some technique that might emerge into some sort of a melody and an idea. Would you be open to drafting an idea of a song here live and kind of showing us how you think about that process and what you look for? And
well, so it's interesting, sometimes you just write something. I could also give you a couple examples of even existing things where it's probably more rare that I write this way, but sometimes I'll go, okay, is there a particular thing that I want to write? There's a tune of mine called Lord, That's a Long Way, and that we just recently recorded. And I wrote this, I wanted something in B, because B's great bluegrass key.
Sure is.
And I'd written maybe a tune or two in B before, but not so many. And I was thinking about the idea of having something that felt kind of bluegrassy, but also could have something for the band that I'm touring with now, which doesn't include banjo but has drums. So it's kind of this hybrid where it's partly bluegrass and kind of partly not. And so kind of trying to lean into something like that, and was also thinking about okay, well, what would this feel like to play? What would I want something to feel like if I stood on stage and I opened a show with a particular thing? What energy does that have, So you give yourself a couple starting ideas for inspiration. So I thought, well, would be cool, I'm in B, so I'm starting on a B note, and I thought, well, rhythmically it could be cool to have some kind of halftime thing, and if it starts with me and then everybody else kind of doubles that same rhythm, where it's more less boom chick bone chick, and maybe we'll get to that, but the idea of having this, and then it's thinking about what kind of feels good under a riff like that. Now, I remember this song kind of wrote itself quickly, because I gave myself those kind of guidelines. Sometimes you have that, where that'll happen, or there's another song of mine called The Last Minute, where I remember wanting to write something beautiful, so I kind of went, okay, D's one of, I think, the most beautiful keys on the mandolin. So kind of giving myself a couple guidelines and wanting it to be singable. So not a real busy melody, something. That's what I find with, say, a lot of Béla's really beautiful tunes. He's really good at writing these simple, singable melodies. That can be so hard to do. It's a lot easier to write. Or just noodle something kind of busy and fiddle tune-like, but leaving tons of space. So a lot of times it depends on what I'm going for. Am I trying to write something that's has that busy bluegrassy energy, and can I sort of almost imagine the way I want it to feel before I actually put any notes into it? What is the emotion that I want to evoke? Is it whoa, this is a really fun bluegrass kind of driving thing, or is it something really beautiful and melodic, singable? But then you can have moments like, I remember you mentioned the Weighted Mind album.
Mm-hmm.
There's a piece on there called Royalty that is kind of paired with an old song called Queen of Hearts. And like this kind of move on the mandolin. I remember writing this as far back as to being in my parents' kitchen.
Wow.
Like in high school, and it was an idea that I just had sitting around for a while and hadn't fully developed yet. But like the idea of being able to kind of have this stretch, something about that just felt satisfying rather than playing, just playing something in first position, kind of starting with the harmonics and then working your way into something that just physically feels interesting to the fingers. Like I could say the other tune I was talking about, it's not that doesn't feel interesting, but it's very mandolin-y.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas something like this, even from the right hand string jumping and different things, it's just different than playing playing something very linear on one string and then moving to another string. So like, I don't know, give me an idea of something if we want to try to like demonstrate something like, like say if you were like, write a particular thing in this key,
Great. Maybe something slow melodic in the key of B, since that's a good
key of B. Okay.
That's your...
So if we're in B, like then a lot of what I would start out doing is just noodling, truly, whether it was maybe you build a theme,
repeat.
Now maybe you go, let's go somewhere interesting.
Something
whether even if it's just something simple like a flat 7, but again, looking for something interesting in the way something physically feels. So maybe you grab an octave, something you can be more strummy on. And again, I might work on that and, throw it away because I'll go, well, it sounds too much like something else. But I think a part of what I've realized, the further I get into like writing tunes and stuff is like you have to allow yourself that process to just sort of work through things that sound like other things, especially like the hardest thing to write is something simple. We could write something obscure and kind of crazy and, might make your musician pals go, whoa, bro, that's super cool. But like, to really write something that's like I think about, I mentioned Béla, and we've been talking about him so much, but like Big Country. Mm-hmm. Everyone loves that tune. It's so singable. It's so memorable, It's so simple, right? And it's kind of got a theme that repeats, so even when you think about trying to write something, in whatever key or whatever spirit, a lot of times like kind of developing themes. That's a big thing that I kind of lean on. A lot of the music I grew up playing in the fiddle tune form, oftentimes, there's themes that repeat themselves. Oftentimes you'll have an AA structure and a BB structure, and 9 times out of 10 the B part ends by repeating the back end of the A part, right? It returns home to that. Or if you want to keep the harmony kind of more standard, maybe you drop a beat somewhere so that there's a rhythmically interesting something. So a lot of times it's like hashing things out in this kind of improvised way. I mean, I can't tell you how often I use my phone in voice memos, and I'll just kind of just play. I'll just play and try to be unfiltered, so if it's kind of what I was just doing here. Okay, that's kind of starting to get a little bit busy, but if you go, maybe you take a phrase like that and go, well, how can I play that somewhere else on the instrument with that same, rhythm. Maybe it's over a different key, or maybe it returns back to that, and that's sort of the climax of what the melody does. Basically, it's like quick composition. It's the difference is like with melodies and writing tunes, we can kind of return to them, we can edit them, we can sort of try different things and throw things away, bring new ideas in. But it's sort of like at the end we're just sort of looking for something that feels satisfying to our ear and hopefully has a little bit of uniqueness that you can kind of claim as your own.
I'm curious, in terms of harmonic movement, this is maybe a little in the weeds, but if you're open to a nerdy question.
Sure.
Are there, you just mentioned, okay, we want to change this melody a little bit, maybe go down to the flat 7, and I know in that first really pretty tune that you played, I think there was like a major 2 chord. Are there movements, harmonic movements, where you're like, I want to step outside of this diatonic thing? Are there movements where you're just like, I know that sounds great. Like, I love this sound of going from the 1 chord to the flat 7 or something like this?
Maybe so. It's funny though, I tend to think that usually when I write, I don't think about any of that stuff. I mean, I'm sort of breaking it down and talking about it a little here, but most of the time, like, I laugh because like everybody in my band is really good at like, I mean, they understand all the theory inside and out. And a lot of times I'm like the one being like, well, I don't know what this is, like, and then I'll play something and like my drummer will be like, oh, it's a bar of 5. And I'm like, okay, cool. But I'm usually just writing stuff, and they think I write all these wacky tunes, which is kind of funny. But a lot of times, like, I'm not thinking about it at all. I'm just going, where is the melodic phrase leading me, and does it feel satisfying? Does it feel like it has like some melodic or rhythmic weight to it? I don't know. And then sometimes that means stuff comes out crooked for better or for worse, and it kind of winds up being interesting, maybe because I'm not putting any particular walls up. I'm just kind of like just noodling around and trying to find interesting pathways on the instrument, and then later I'll go, oh, what's actually happening here? What are the chords, or what are the best supporting chords, or if the things that feel the most obvious, then I might go, well, would this be cool to change to make it feel a little more interesting here, But a lot of times the bones of the tune, a lot of times the only thing that kind of prompts something for me is going, well, what key would I like to have something in? Like there's another song off my new record called Let's Go that I had some existing lyrics, and I think I was thinking about how there's not that many mandolin tunes in F, and I kind of ended up turning it into a vocal thing just because the lyrics ended up having to just kind of be sitting there, but I was kind of playing around with almost wondered if this couldn't just be a tune at first. And had that kind of mandolin idea, and thinking about like
funky mandolin thing.
Having like a, kind of offbeat.
Syncopated thing.
Imagining like that would be the bass or the guitar, and was sort of just thinking about it more like, sounds funny to say old time mandolin, but like or like a old time kind of tune, like think about trying to write something like that became like a funky something. At this, like, simultaneously, like fiddle tune meets interesting groove supporting it, and so and having like instruments kind of support whatever the melody is, like almost like a collective rhythmic thing creating the melody rather than just, so you can kind of keep the melody like fairly simple, not that that's like super simple, but you know what I mean. It's like it's not it's not like some super crazy like fiddle tuney notey thing,
right?
Like a collective of the musicians. And in that time I was kind of again thinking about, well, the musicians I'm touring with now, and like what that instrumentation would sound like playing something. And then it happened to get kind of turned into a vocal thing. But it's, in that case I was like, well, it feels satisfying to play a mandolin thing in F, because you don't get that as much.
Totally.
Or I don't think I really have that many songs in F. So sometimes I just get a hankering to want to play in a particular kind of key, or you know what I'm saying? And then just if the inspiration comes, sometimes it works itself out into an actual fully fleshed idea. And then, sometimes I've just got 1,000 voice memos of stuff that I may never get to.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But I think being open to logging your ideas, I would encourage like all musicians to do that, because it's really easy to throw stuff away and feel like I'm so guilty of thinking, nothing I do is interesting. So like, that's not any good. That's not any good. I probably would write more tunes even now if I just allowed myself to be okay with even writing something that might sound like something else, but that's okay. I mean, we only have so many notes,
right?
So, and there's so much music out there, so you're almost going to always have something that sounds a little like something else somebody's done, unless you're really leaning into some super obscure harmony thing,
I'm curious about the arranging process for this band in particular, and the recent tour that I suppose you're still sort of on in a sense. How did you think about arranging these tunes? How do you arrange in general when you're playing with a band?
Well, with this particular band, it's become like so easy. I think I had just got a Mando, like to thinking about that song, I had just got a Mando cello, and I was kind of having fun with it. So like when I kind of demoed it, and I demoed it in the most janky way. I had like an iPad and then my iPhone, and I just recorded one on the other and then like played it back. It wasn't even like having a Pro Tools session up or anything like that. Yeah. But when I was playing this, I just used the Mando cello to play the,
bass line. Yeah.
And then having the harmony grab here, like having that turn into a harmony line. And so that was the basic idea, and I kind of just had that, and then I wrote the tune with the lyrics and kind of had like the biggest part of it, and then there's like another section, where it kind of just goes into this rhythmic thing, and I was like, oh, that'd be cool for like mandolin and drums to just break down into like, a little section or whatever, but having like the basic idea of it, but then not really knowing, is that, is that going to be bass, or is that going to be guitar, or like who's going to play that line? Should I be the one to play this, or should guitar play that and then me play the, So like a lot of times I'll have this basic sketch of what the thing could be, and then it's like getting together and going, okay, well, bass is probably too heavy to play this offbeat thing. Maybe guitar makes more sense, because then we could think about it being more of like a stereo balance between me playing this, a ping pong kind of thing. Yeah. And would bass and drums just be the anchor of the thing, where maybe bass is actually, playing an F note, a root note, on the beat, and then you've got this guitar
kind of
off the same note, but off the beat. So yeah, and I mean, it's so great to work with musicians. I will say, I've been really lucky. I've always been able to surround myself with people who are so good, so talented, and then that helps me grow, so much, just getting to be in the presence of great musicians. And also I've learned through the process of working on this stuff, like I might have something and you can grow attached to something because that's how you first arranged it. But then if you stay open to the idea that actually this middle section that we think is cool is actually just way too long. Like, and even later after you've played it like for a while, starting to realize, okay, am I being too precious about this thing I wrote?
Shifting gears a little bit here, you've been very prolific through your whole career. I want to hear about how you relate to longevity in your career, almost like stamina and burnout, and like balancing life and conserving your energy. And how do you relate to that when you're touring and writing and doing all these things?
I think for me, the older I get, the more I'm trying to be aware of, I don't know that I'm like near burnout. I think for me, like being and a lot of people see my schedule sometimes and they go, oh my God, you're so busy. Like, what the heck? And I'm like, well, thankfully I do still love it. And I think a big part of that is because I'm choosing to play music in a way that feels creatively fulfilling to me. I think I'm both lucky to get to do that, but also, trying to make sure that I'm finding ways to keep myself inspired. And I think being able to lead my own thing that's one of the blessings of it, is that I can go, hey, I can put this in the set list, or I can do this, or I can be like, I'm working on this new thing. Let me do this, and sort of being able to sort of set my own speed and creativity in that way. But also surrounding yourself by people that continue to inspire you, having good people that you actually want to be around on the road. I think, like, if the vibes are not good on the road with the people you're traveling with, it's just, I mean, and I've never really experienced that too much. I think I've been really careful about who I choose to sort of invite in long term to the circle, of people that I'm around, and also have been lucky that some of the most talented people I've gotten to work with also are just really good humans. So that's important to me, and I think if you're going to be doing it the amount that I'm doing it with, a lot of the same people, you got to have that friendship and connection with, because you don't want to be dreading going and getting on a bus for 3 weeks with people that just are a good hang, or maybe are burnt out themselves, and we all get tired. It's not like we all don't get tired, and sometimes we'll be like, okay, one more show, let's do it. We all have those moments of feeling that way, because being on the road is hard. But yeah, I think just trying to balance, my love of it and the actual drive I have, and keep my anxiety in check for the times when I tell myself, no, you actually need to rest, and that's okay. Because I'm not good at that. But I'm trying to learn to be better at it, because I do know that's important long term for, both mental health and physical health, all those things.
On the most recent record, you decided to release independently. Tell me about that process. Like, what were the benefits of doing that, and how has that transition been for you?
Well, I'm still learning right now as to, how it's all unfolding. We're only a couple months as of now into the release, but I had released my first 4 albums on Rounder. I was lucky to sign with Rounder when I was 13, I think. I recorded my first album at 15. I think it came out at 16, so it was a minute there in between that, but they never pressured me to have to quickly, put out things. And I'm very grateful about that. And it's funny that you called me prolific, because sometimes I feel like, am I? I've been slow to make my records last. I mean, because the truth is that I've been doing it a really long time. So it's in the scope of people putting out a record a year or every other year, I've not done that. I've definitely taken my time, but I have been present the whole time in terms of touring and playing. It's not like I've ever just went, I'm going to take 2 years off. I've never done that. So in that sense, I've certainly always been kind of writing and creating and touring and making music with people and all that. But I think because I took my time with those records, and then my 25 Trips album came out in 2020. That was, at the time, it had been 5 years since I released Weighted Mind, and that record came out a week before the pandemic. And it was an interesting time to release an album. There was all this kind of excitement leading up to finally having something, and then everyone and everything, we all just kind of had to shut things down. So that was also the final record that I owed Rounder, and that they owed me. And at the time, I felt like, well, I'm in this quiet place, forcibly, for the first time in my career, where we're all just kind of forced to be home a minute, and kind of, I had just put out a record, so it didn't feel like the pressure to need to put out another record immediately. But I also didn't feel the pressure to need to know what that looked like. So I wasn't really interested in trying to re-sign a contract, because I had been in my contract since the time I was 13. And like I said, loved my experience being there. Rounder was the label I dreamed of being on as a kid. I mean, that is the album that the label that released Church Street Blues and all of the Alison albums I loved. I used to draw the Rounder logo on the back of fake CD covers as a kid. I loved doing art, and I would make up fake song titles like "This Is My Record," and draw that legendary logo. So I'm just beyond grateful I got to spend that time there. But it's such a different time in the music industry now than it was when I was 13. I mean, I'm 33 now, so 20 years. It's quite a gap in how things change, and from streaming to physical copies of albums. Just, we don't consume music the way we once did either. we have more access, direct access to our fans than ever before. And in some ways need that, direct access. So I don't know, I just kind of felt like because most people get the experience early in their career of doing it themselves and like learning how to do that and everything, and then they hope to get signed, and maybe they eventually do. I didn't have that. I was just signed immediately. That's all I've ever known. You know what I'm saying? So because I'd had this one kind of experience, and it was different, like I said, different people came through the leadership roles at the label over those years. That's a long time to be somewhere, nearly, I wouldn't say 20 years, but a long time.
Yeah.
My whole career.
Yeah.
So it just kind of felt like I owed it to myself to also like own this music. I wanted something that was mine. And I felt like I had the resources and the team to do it. I didn't need a label, at least for this one. I don't know, that doesn't mean I'm not anti-label. Yeah. The next thing I do could very well be with a label, but I just felt like the opportunity and the team was there to make this one happen. And it felt exciting to have ownership of something, to be in the driver's seat completely.
Right.
And thankfully it was in a place, both career and financially and all that stuff, to where I could afford to make that happen.
Wow. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, because it seems like anything you draw on paper comes true. If you were to draw something now for the next chapter of your career, what would you draw?
It's funny, somebody tagged me in a video from a show a couple weeks ago, and the album, basically just came out, and we were playing some of the songs before, and it feels different now that the songs are out, because people now, they're theirs now, they know them. And some guy was just singing every word in this video really out of tune. Like really, it was kind of bad, I'm not gonna lie. And yet I still was like...
It sounded great if you're watching this video.
But I still was like, this is the most awesome thing. I love this. I was like, as a songwriter and as an artist, that means that somebody came to my show, these words mean something to them, and that they feel enough joy and freedom in the midst of my show to just let it out. It was just beautiful, and it doesn't matter that they're singing out of tune or whatever. It's like, as the artist, like there's no greater joy than that. So I just think like, it is a lot of work to, I think as an artist, you feel a bit of a, the more successful you become, they talk about like, it's a hard climb to the top, and then once you get there, even harder to stay there. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't really want to have the pressure of like feeling like, I've got to compete against myself or whatever. Excuse me. But I do feel like there's a certain amount of like, like wanting to continue to grow the thing and reach more people and feel like, this is something that I can do for a lifetime, because I know I'll be doing it either way. Yeah. But I think, the travel and all that kind of stuff, you with more success becomes more opportunity and more ability to like bring those that are working alongside of you, and be able to be more generous to them and, change their lives in ways too. So, in the wildest of ways, that's really what I dream of the most, is just being able to continue to reach people and do this for a long time. Even if it's a slow climb, I would much rather it be a slow climb than a real quick one that fizzles out,
Yeah, 100%. I'm curious if you might share a tune before we wrap up.
Oh, sure. All right. What you want to hear?
The A major scale. Sick.
Okay, well, let's play something in A. Let's see. Maybe I'll play you, this is one of the early tunes I always played, called Cherokee Shovel.
Awesome. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. If folks want to follow along with some of the things you're doing, where can they find your music and obviously socials and all that stuff?
Yeah, probably the easiest spot's just sierrahall.com, but I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all
Great.
the spots.
Amazing. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.